Okay, now that we've got our users coming back correctly from our API, let's see how we can display them in our browser, which is one of our goals of this walking skeleton. So let's head back to VS Code, and we've got the data populated on our users when it comes back from the API, and now we need to adjust our template. One way we can get to our template without going to File Explorer or using the search is that we can right-click the template URL and we can say go to definition. Or we can press whatever shortcut key comes up, F12 in my case, but we can use this to go to our HTML template and it'll open it up in a new tab. Also, because of the Angular language service, we've got the ability to go back to our component and that'll take us to our app component.ts. Just a couple of little ways to get around our file system because Angular does work with different files for its component. Every component that we create will typically have the component file, the template file, and the CSS file. So we do end up switching between them quite frequently. Now we want to display our list of users in a list, and we can use a UL for an unordered list, and then we can display our users as list items. Now our users are an array of users and we need to loop over them. And the Angular way of doing this is to use a structural directive. Structural directives start with an asterisk, and we're going to use the ng for structural directive, which we get a warning for, which I'll come back to soon, and then we say let user of users. And that gives us access to, or repeats each time, for each user in this list, it's going to repeat this list item for each user that we have. Now, what is this warning? And it tells us that the ng4 directive was used in the template, but neither the ng4 directive nor the common module was imported. Use Angular's built-in control flow at 4, or make sure that either the ng4 directive or the common module is included in the component's imports array of this component. So one way we could deal with this is to use or add the import for the ng4 directive inside our component. And we could add to our imports, we could add a comma, and we can specify ng4 and make sure that we have this imported from Angular Common. Another approach we could take is just to import the common module because the ng4 is part of that particular module. But unless we're using everything from the common module and we're using standalone components, then it makes sense to only import what we're actually using. So in this case, the ng4, and then if we go back to our template, then the error has gone away. And from here, we can just specify, using interpolation, what we want to display in each of these list items. So I can open up the double brackets and I can say user.id, and then specify a dash and say user.username. And I've done this on purpose, by the way, just to demonstrate case sensitivity in Angular. What I'd expect to see in the browser is the user's ID, but then a blank for the username because it's differing in casing between what we get back from our API and what I've specified here. So if I go to the browser, I can see 123 dash dash dash, but no usernames. And really that's just a demonstration of the case sensitivity because our usernames are coming back like this. And if I go back to the browser now, then we can see that we have our 3 different usernames inside there. But when I looked at the ng4, there was different options. And if I go back to our component, and let's just take out the ng4 temporarily, and just explore the other option available here, because hovering over this alludes to the fact there's a different method of looping over something in Angular. And we've got this built-in control flow at 4. So let's take a look at this, but I also just want to expand on what I said before about being a structural directive. Anything that's marked with an asterisk means that it is a structural directive, which means it affects the actual domain object model in the HTML. And it will add these elements to the DOM as it loops over each user. But there's an alternative to this syntax as well, and that's to use the @4 control flow. So let's try and do it that way and see if that gives us the same output. So instead of specifying let users of users this way, Then above the list item, we can use @for, and then we could specify, and that snippet just appeared. I didn't add anything to use that. I just said @for in tab, and then it automatically added these elements. So I could say user of users, for example, and then inside these curly brackets, I can take the list item, cut it, and put it inside here. And this gives us the same functionality. So if we do use this approach and this track number, this index, if we've got an ID of something, we can use the ID. So that could be user ID instead of $index for more accurate tracking, because each user does have an ID. Otherwise, we could just use that index syntax. So since this is the Angular or new for Angular 17 way of doing things, this is the approach I'll typically take rather than importing the ngFor into the app components. We don't need to add anything to our import because we're using the Angular built-in control flow instead of the structural directive there. And if we go back and take a look, then we get the same functionality. We can obviously Bob, Tom and Jane, and they appear in our list. Excellent. So that takes care of our walking skeleton anyway, but we're going to add a few more things to our project before we finish this section. And we'll start by taking a look at a user interface component library that we can add to our project, and also an icon set as well. And we'll take a look at that next.